Morning, good afternoon, or good evening. It's me, Mr. Kraus. That's the beauty of tech, right? You guys can watch it anywhere, anytime. Maybe you missed school, maybe you're finding this video in subsequent years where you need a review of dependent clauses. Speaking of dependent clauses, if you're not familiar with my class, I like to use pet terms, cute terms for the different parts of speech and different comma rules that I teach. So for dependent clause review, I'll refer to them as dependent clause words. The correct term, buried here in some instructions, is subordinating conjunctions. I just refer to them as dependent clauses. That goes back to the initial lecture that I work with in the classroom. All right, let's get on with this handout. If you found this video, you probably need a review. You might be chasing just before a dependent clause test or the subsequent lesson, a parallel structure test, and you will be held accountable for dependent clauses as well on that test. All right, how do we get our dependent clause list going? You need to know those words. That helps you find them. It helps you write correctly. You would think of hopefully your if, when, since, because, or your because is primary in that list. But again, if, when, since, because is your starter list. That gets you a few. And then when you take a look at if, you might remember even if. You might remember even though. When you get into those, you might remember although, even though, I already said. That gets you a couple more on the list. You go back to that original list, the even if, when, since, and you look at your WH words. So you have your even if, your when, your where, your while, your what. With where, you might get whereas. That'll link you over to the as words, as long as soon as if, as by itself, right? So that's several words that help you grow the list. Again, think of your WH words, think of your though words, think of your as words, and you'll do just fine. What I'm hoping you'll be able to do before you get into your own writing is simply identify those words. So I don't have a tool to circle it on a Google Doc, so I'm just going to highlight, but in your guys' work, please circle the becauses. And the trick I would recommend is finding them first. And when you do that, it helps you work through what's next. All right. I'm going to focus on the second example first. So if you find the dependent clause words first, it helps you figure out the dependent clause, helps you underline it. And dependent clauses, again, have a subject and a verb. So I in this middle one, and then I again in this second one, and they have verbs, right? So a few verbs here, want to get, and still forget. All right, so when you find the dependent clauses, that's important, right? With this second sentence, when dependent clauses occur maybe in the middle or at the end of a sentence, please remember, no punctuation, nada, zip, zilch, zero punctuation. In fact, if you would just record yourself a little note in this space over here, in this space off to the right, draw an arrow to this sentence, and record the different ways to say no, and the word punctuation. So nada, zip, zilch, zero punctuation when dependent clauses occur at the end or in the middle of a sentence. All right. That blanket rule is a little bit different when you come to this problem. All right, so let's finally talk about this. When you start a sentence with a dependent clause, like if, when, since, or because, here we have, because I love my mom, I do what she asks of me, you should be hearing a natural pause, and that's exactly what happens. You need a comma after mom, and that is the dependent clause that begins a sentence. It gets a comma, so make sure you have that in your example. And then moving on to the directions, so I wrap up this video for you guys. That's what I want you to do. I want you to circle the dependent clause word, underline the dependent clause, and then put a comma, and keep doing that throughout these first 10 examples. So that's what it says, label by underlining, circle the dependent clause, also known as a subordinating conjunction. And then moving on to this next section where there's 8, You're simply combining the sentences, punctuating correctly with the given dependent clause word. All right. Hopefully in these 8, at least one is in the beginning. Not all of them are in the end, all right? Or at the end, excuse me. Moving on, the challenge is required. This is a terrific handout, but I'm always trying to push your knowledge and understanding of the grammar moves, not in this simple sense, right? But more like if you go back to this second example, right? Dependent clauses can be added to sentences, as many as you need, right? Excluding style, of course. So that's it, guys. Please get this handout done. I look forward to helping you when you're in class. If you need some extra help outside of class, you can hit up myself or Miss Edmonds in R5. Have a great one, and go Vikings.